everyone. Welcome to Keto and Crime. I am back with what happened in the Chad Daybell trial on Tuesday, April 23rd. If you're seeing this when it was just released, I'm coming to you on Wednesday, April 24th. And with that being said, we're going to get right into it. My name is Tracy. I run this channel. I do true crime, dark history, horror movie reviews. I also do Holiday Trees, which is currently on Cinco de Mayo. And with that being said, let's dive into what happened on Tuesday, April 23rd in the Chad Daybell trial. When court begins, we are continuing with David Warwick, Melanie Gibbs' husband, on the stand with John Pryor cross-examining him. He's talking about his history with Chad, where he met him. You remember on Monday, he talked about the potential real estate advice he gave Chad, the fact that Chad was made Warwick a little uncomfortable. And so we're continuing along that. Pryor again begins questioning Warwick about his own relationship with Melanie Gibb. He did admit they lived together for several months before they began living in separate residences. And then he takes us back to Pryor asked specifically about that Saturday where, JJ had all of the issues and they recorded that infamous podcast. He said that Chad was wearing his church clothes when he got there that weekend, and he did not get there until late in the afternoon. And this was several months, as you recall, before Tammy died. He said that Chad said he had been at a calling. Again, another one of those strange rituals that, calling, cleansing, that we've been privy to. And then he talks about Chad, again, more of the doctrine, kind of went through what happened again on that weekend, everything from when he saw JJ and when he did not. The gist of it is Pryor wanted to establish that Chad was not there at all on the Saturday, and they did not see him until the afternoon on Sunday. And then Pryor's cross-examination is over, and then the prosecution has a few redirects. When they asked Warwick about, again, the doctrine, all of that good stuff, and the fact that, specifically honing in on the fact that Chad asked Melanie not to speak with police. So the prosecution redirects and brings that up on it. And then Wixom continues, basically pinning a lot of the undertone that would have led to the deaths on Chad. Wixom releases the witness, and Pryor will, again, do another redirect for the prosecutions. They go back where Chad first started talking about Tammy possibly dying, and that it would happen sometime in the near future end. Just hardcore. Pryor is really trying to hone in that Chad had been talking about Tammy's death in a matter-of-fact way, not a murdery way, just accepting that she was probably going to die early kind of way, as if she was terminally ill, which we know she wasn't, trying to remove Chad as far from potential guilt as possible. Warwick is dismissed, but he's still under subpoena. Next witness for the state is Brandon Beaudoux, Melanie Palawowski's ex-husband, Lori Daybell's niece, a member of the cult. Basically, they are talking about the history of their marriage. They were married from 2008 to 2018, about 10 years. Brandon said he met Melanie's entire family, including Janice, the grandmother, Barry, the father, Adam, the zombie brother, and Alex. She said she also, that Melanie spent a lot of time with Lori and Charles, as did he, and they got to know them very well. Brandon told everybody that it was easy to see that JJ had autism, or he was very nonverbal. Brandon describes Tylee as a good girl who kept to herself but watched too much Netflix, but most of the time she was very sweet and she had good motherly instincts with JJ. Then Brandon comments on the relationship between Melanie Palawowski and Lori. He said Melanie's mother died when Melanie was young, so she looked to Lori, he said, in his opinion, as a mother figure, and said that he himself had almost father figure relationship with Charles. So Brandon said that things began to distance between Lori and Charles around that Christmas, and he thought it was very strange that someone he did not know, i.e. Melanie Gibb, was there during Christmas. Brandon said he spoke with his Melanie during that visit, and with Melanie Gibb. He said it was pretty normal Christmas type visit. But he said in 2018 there was a very distinct change to his wife's approach to church. She had not been fully committed to temple. She didn't go a lot, but then all of a sudden when she started hanging out with Lori and Melanie Gibb, she started going to temple daily. He himself says, I do adhere to Mormon faith, but I believe that moderation is necessary. And he says that if someone feels they need to go to a temple, that's great, but he's more of a once a week, once a month kind of person, and that a daily visit is, in his opinion, something that someone would do if they had nothing else to do, if they weren't busy, if they had no responsibilities. And then he talked about how his wife or ex-wife began attending what she referred to as firesides. These are those infamous chats with Lori and Chad and, Melanie Gibb, Alex Cox. And then said that he got really concerned when Melanie started wanting to become like a hardcore doomsday prepper and save up massive food storages, water storages. He told her that this doesn't really seem like a faith-based thing for him. He said he never attended any of the firesides and really tried to convince Melanie to distance herself from them. And then in January of 2019, he said Lori sent messages to the family that Charles was cheating. She began taking things, money, resources from Charles to store up for a potential divorce. Then he found out that because he was wondering why Charles wasn't contacting him, because like I said, they had like a father figure kind of relationship. He found out that his ex-wife had blocked Charles on his phone, so he wasn't getting any communiques with Charles. Then they talked about Lori taking off for several days at a time, leaving JJ, and that Tylee had to step in and become kind of a mom for JJ, and that his former wife, did take Lori's side. They were all encouraged to take sides, that it was either stand up for Lori or you're an enemy kind of thing forming on. Brandon gets a little choked up talking about the kids and how much he liked Tylee and JJ. And then Brandon and Melanie visited family. He said there was the death of his grandfather, heart attack. It was a little bit unexpected. When Brandon learned the date of the funeral, he tried to get Melanie to attend with the entire family. She refused to attend his grandfather's funeral. That led to an argument. During the argument, Brandon said Melanie accused him of hacking into Lori's computer. Rob Wood is the one questioning, by the way, says that started talking about that hacking, and Pryor immediately begins objecting to this line of questioning. But basically, what Brandon is saying, that it was never proven that he hacked it because he didn't. He said it was a wild accusation, and it was just kind of symptomatic of what kind of accusations Melanie would start throwing at him in the future. And I remember they're still married and living together. He said he was very disappointed and frustrated. Basically, when he found out that Charles's number had been blocked, he unblocked it. He immediately texted Charles and began a rapport with him. This angered Melanie. And then he and Melanie got into another wham-bam fight. After Melanie went to bed, Brandon stayed up. He said he was very troubled the majority of the night. Then he texted Lori and Charles, telling them if his family was ruined because of these crackpot beliefs, that all of it was on them. He said Lori never responded to the message, but Charles did. He said he and Charles spoke. Charles apologized for not being there for him, and Charles was obviously very troubled about what was going on in his own house with his own children. He said at that point, he no longer had any contact with Lori, JJ, and Tylee. He said he and Melanie went through a separation and a divorce, and then a very tumultuous custody. Remember the whole thing with him taking his kids to Utah to his parents, and then Melanie trying to come there against a restraining order and visit them, and then she got arrested, and Alex Cox had to bail her out. Remember that whole thing? So very contentious divorce, but he and Melanie were divorced, and he began those proceedings immediately after his grandfather's funeral. I really feel sorry for Brandon. Brandon talked about how cold Melanie became. He said he just pretty much cut off all contact with Lori, Tylee, and JJ. And then in October of 2019, someone shot at him in front of his house, which, we know that story. He said he worked from home. He was an insurance broker. So he got his kids ready for school. He dropped them off at school. He went to the gym. When he returned to the gym, he saw a Jeep, which would later be Charles Vallow's Jeep, parked on the near corner of his home. And then he saw a gun, a silencer, and he was shot through his window. He called the police. The Jeep driver fled. And then he said he immediately reported everything to the police, and then later found out that it was the Jeep purchased by Charles for Tylee. He said he was able to obtain all that information because he was an insurance broker, and he provided the VIN number and everything to the Jeep to the local police. Then there's a recess and a long sidebar, about 45 minutes between the attorneys and the judge, while Brandon Beaudoux continues to sit on the stand. The sidebar then ends, and Wood continues his direct examination of Brandon by putting up a picture of Tylee's Jeep. Brandon confirms that is the correct Jeep. He said that he was very traumatizing. He knew resolution wouldn't come quickly. He included hiring his own private investigator, and he provided the police with every communication he had between Charles, he, and Melanie. And then a lot of them were Charles Vallow being concerned about Lori's mental health, as we all know, was under duress at that time. They then talk a little bit about what Melanie and Lori believed, the dark spirits, and then he learned that he himself had been pegged as a dark spirit, and then the attempt on his life. He was very scared, as you can imagine. And then time passes. He finally hears Chad Daybell about, more about Chad. He decides to Google Chad Daybell's name. He found the obituary for Tammy, was very shocked. And then he learned, like everyone else, that JJ and Tylee were missing. And then he got a call in June, informing in 2020 when they found the bodies. Then talked about how traumatic that was. He begins to break down on the stand, and the police and the Rob Wood releases him from direct examination. Pryor now cross-examines Brandon Beaudoux. He asked again how close Alex Cox and Lori were. He said that he thought it was a little strange that Alex moved several times to be closer to his sister. Pryor reconstrues that Tylee was a very close second mom to JJ. Brandon says that he's already stated that, kind of non-committal. It's obvious Brandon does not like John Pryor. Few do. He says that he asked him about Charles's life insurance policy because Brandon, being an insurance broker, Charles had helped set up the policy for him, though he did not service it. If you're a broker, you work for several different agencies, you can set something up. He did say that originally, yes, Lori was the beneficiary when he originally helped him set up the policy, but after that, it's up to the company to service it, and he would not know anything about any beneficiary changes after that. So then he begins asking Brandon to comment on the relationship between Lori and Melanie Gibb. The firesides, was Melanie always in attendance? He said he can't answer that. He didn't know Melanie Gibb that well. Then Pryor starts asking about temple visits and sealing ceremonies, and then more about the firesides. Brandon is trying to, answer, I think, to the best of his knowledge. He said, look, I'm a typical Mormon that does not attend temple that often, so a lot of this is lost on me. And then, but Brandon does say, I do know enough to know that firesides and light and dark scales and zombies is not in typical Mormon doctrine. Then Brandon Beaudoux is released, and he's actually released from his subpoena, so he does not have to come back. Then the state calls Gilbert, Arizona police officer Ryan Pillar. Assistant District Attorney Ingrid Beatty is on the direct examination of Pillar. Pillar was one of the officers who responded to the Brandon Beaudoux shooting. Pillar says that there was evidence in Brandon's vehicle that suggests sustained damage from a projectile, and there was a Jeep idling near his house up to the time of the shooting. The description, he talks about the description, all the information that Brandon was able to provide them: a dark gray Jeep displaying a Texas license plate, and it had no spare tire on the rear hatch. Again, matches Tylee's Jeep, the one purchased for her by Charles. And then they talk about the recent homicide in Chandler of Charles Vallow and involving Alex Cox, Lori Vallow. And then so it was from the Jeep that he found out that Charles Vallow was recently deceased under suspicious circumstances. And then they designated Alex Cox, because Alex had been seen driving the Jeep, as a person of interest in the attempted shooting of Brandon Beaudoux. And then they found from tracking the Jeep that he had traveled to and from Rexburg, and that's when Pillar called Rexburg PD and Fremont County Sheriff's Office to have them look for the Jeep. And we all know everyone involved: Detective Hermosillo, some of the other Rexburg and Fremont County officials. While searching the Jeep after it was finally taken into custody, they found physical evidence, DNA, gunshot residue in the Jeep that would shift attention back to the Brandon Beaudoux shooting, pretty much pinpointing that Jeep as the shooter's vehicle. And then they start talking about the missing children. Pillar says he found no evidence either child was in Arizona at 2019. They had been searching both states for evidence. Pillar said that he stopped surveying Alex Cox, on December 12th due to his death. And he said they did execute a search of Alex's home, where they found guns, clothing, Chad's books, and they found a lot of gun paraphernalia in the trunk of Alex's car. And then this is where the prosecution has no further questions for Pillar. There's a short discussion with the judge, and then it takes a little bit longer, so they dismiss the jury for a minute, then they bring the jury back, and then Pryor cross-examines Pillar. Pryor starts talking about how the common denominator of everything from the children missing to the Jeep to Brandon Beaudroux's attempted shooting is Lori and Alex. And Pillar agrees, yes, they're definitely a common denominator. And he pretty much mic drop. Pryor did a good job with that. Mic drops, and Pillar steps down and is released from subpoena. Then the state calls Fremont County Sheriff's Office Deputy Coulter Cannon. He is a school resource officer and patrol officer in Fremont County. He is one of the ones that responded to the attempted shooting of Tammy Daybell on October 9th, 2019. That was labeled as a paint gun. The court listened to the 911 call from the house reporting the shooting. Tammy herself, and then she talks about how she was removing, and you can find that 911 call on East Idaho News's page. Tammy said she was removing the stuff from her back seat of her car, found a man wearing a mask pointing at what she thought was a paintball gun at her. She yelled for Chad. The man took off around her house. We now know that was most likely the AR-15 that Alex that jammed, and so that's probably what saved her life. He said that he fired at her, but nothing came out. So basically, that gun jamming saved her life. We know that. And then Cannon says he responded to the call and the sun was going down. It was about dusk. And then Cannon said they drove around the property searching for the assailant. They did not find anyone. At this point, there is a break for lunch. They're back about an hour, 15 minutes later. Direct examination by Wixom continues on Deputy Coulter, or Deputy Cannon. Cannon said again he searched the area around the Daybell home looking for anyone that might have fired that shot. Nothing was found. The searches were unsuccessful. He did speak with Tammy, get a statement. He got a statement from Chad, and then said that Tammy described hearing 2 pops, but that nothing was discharged from the gun. He said that Chad was really kind of tight-lipped, didn't want to talk, didn't get a whole lot of information. But Cannon said that Chad would have heard his entire conversation with Tammy Daybell. He said it was obvious to him that Chad never pursued the potential gunman, never seemed upset or shaken by it. They found no paintball residue, live ammunition casings on the property. As they said, the gun, we found out later, the gun had jammed. Then the state says no further questions, and John Pryor cross-examines. He asked about the 2 separate reports filed by Cannon reverting the incidents. He said one was very short. He says, yes, it was. That was the initial report. But after he got a chance to talk more with Tammy, he did file a more extensive report. And he said that unfortunately his body cam was not active because it was broken. And then they show a copy of the report where the word gun and paintball gun are used kind of interchangeably. He basically said in the first report, he said paintball gun because that's what Tammy said. In the second report, he said gun because they weren't sure what kind of gun it was. Then they play the 911 calls from Tammy one more time. And then they talk about the longer report. And Cannon says that he was told by a supervisor, you need to add more detail to this report. It's a little sketchy. And then it was filed, and that's where paintball gun became gun. Again, because they had more information. All right. So then they're talking about, they listened again to the 911 call and asked why he's assuming it's a real gun rather than a paintball gun because Tammy said paintball. Again, Cannon says, I wasn't saying it was a real gun. I just said gun because they did not know what type it was. A paintball gun is still a gun. Then he talked about how the original report said the suspect was around 5'10" to 190 pounds, and the second report listed him at 6 feet, 200 pounds, and Pryor just suggests you were trying to pin it on Alex. You changed it. You changed it to fit Alex Cox's description. And Cannon said, no, again, I had more information because I talked to Tammy. The first report was just the initial, here's what happened. Now I got to go see if I can find this guy kind of report. And also, Mr. Pryor, 5'10" and 6 feet, that's a 2-inch difference and a 10-pound difference. Not huge. Not a huge difference. 2 inches and 190 pounds. I know Pryor probably has, a problem with inches, but that was uncalled for. But it's 2 inches and 10 pounds. Not a huge difference. That could very easily be explained as more information comes in. And Candace says, I was not trying to link it to, neither were my supervisors, trying to link the shooting to any particular person. I was just putting in the information as I got it. They also talk about Tammy's brother-in-law, Joseph Murray, who did not report hearing the gunshot. He said, but I didn't ask him if he heard the gunshot, but I did take his statement about what happened. And a lot of this was based off what Tammy said, because Tammy was the one that experienced it. And then basically, again, why did you change it from paintball gun to gun? He said, because of the information from Tammy. Then they play the 911 call again. Tammy in that 911 call says gun a couple of times without saying paintball gun. So it's interchangeable terms here. Basically, Cannon is not going to concede that it was a paintball gun. Pryor is trying everything he can to get him to say it was a paintball gun, and Cannon isn't. I mean, we've already established from the Lori Daybell trial that it was most likely an AR-15 rifle. That jammed. So he's just going to say gun. And then Pryor's arguing about time differentials, and again, one short report and then a longer report filed 2 months later when they had more information. This is not earth shattering. So basically, Pryor finally drops it and he is released. Cannon is released from the stand and from subpoenas. Then they call Fremont County Sheriff's Deputy Alyssa Greenhall. Greenhall is one of the deputies that responded to the death of Tammy Daybell. They listened to the 911 call from Chad reporting Tammy's death. Chad says, "I'm the husband. She's clearly dead." He starts to cry. Greenhall says that she came to the Daybell property around 6 a.m. that day, that Garth Daybell let Greenhall in. Chad was there, and then later more family arrived. The kids lived pretty close, and said that Chad was definitely more emotional than Garth. He told her how Tammy woke up in the middle of the night in a coughing fit, had to vomit. He said he woke to find her unresponsive and had fallen partially off the bed. He said that he and Garth had moved her back up onto the bed and pulled the cover back up over Tammy's shoulders. Greenhall checked Tammy's body and said she was colder than the room and rigid. Chad told the deputy that Tammy had been suffering from a pretty bad cold, did not like going to the doctor. She had recently fallen, and hence the arm injury, and also that she was going through menopause and suffered from fainting spells. Greenhall then requested assistance from detectives, and they started to do a full-scale investigation, including crime scene photos, and allow the coroner to decide whether an autopsy was needed. She pretty much just took down all the info from Chad and Garth, and no one else provided any info about Tammy or her death. Garth, commented he never heard anything. There was no struggle or anything like that. The state then asked for admittance of crime scene photos, and there's a short sidebar about the crime scene photos of Tammy's death, and then they are allowed to be shown to the jury, but not to the public at large. So it shows the picture of the body, the condition of the body, the way her arms were positioned, and the fact that it was obvious that she had been off the bed, then back on the bed. Then there was another kind of showing the discoloration in Tammy's right ear. We all know that the red froth was later found, and that the coroner did make note of that. Then that kind of shows how they processed the body and then removed it for the coroner to do his work. Chad Daybell was insistent on no autopsy. And then they talked about how there was some essential oils and cough medicine found next to the bed. And then there was also some, in the medicine cabinet, there was some respiratory drugs, congestion, allergy medicine, and some medicine to take away bruising. Again, we know she had fallen and gone to the doctor for an injury. But they did confirm there was no signs of a struggle. Emma, the daughter, did tell Greenblatt that Tammy had been slowing down recently, even though her Fitbit data would say entirely different. She was training for a race. And then we go over to cross-examination, where, again, Pryor homes in on how sick Tammy was, again, going over all the medicines and things of that nature, and then basically releases the witness from him. Wood comes back for a quick redirect and basically hammers home that none of the medications found were anything outlandish. It wasn't like she was being treated by congestive heart failure or something like that. These were allergy medicines, bruising medicines, cough syrup. They were all available over the counter, and it was nothing unusual for that a normal, healthy person wouldn't have for occasional bouts of allergies. And then basically, Grant Hall is released from all subpoenas, and court is adjourned for the day. I will be back with you tomorrow to go over what happened today, Wednesday, April 24th, in the Chad Daybell case. Until next time, Keto and Crime out.